Hi there, I'm Jenn Cassetta, your Chief Badassery Officer. If you're feeling drained, hesitant, stuck in self-doubt, or you just have a case of the vlogs, the Art of Badassery podcast is here to help you unleash your mojo once and for all. We'll provide you with tips, techniques, and real-life examples of how you can kick ass in all areas of your life. You'll learn how to flex your mental muscles, rise above fears, and turn setbacks into superpowers. So let's enter the dojo and let's get to work. Hello and welcome to the Art of Badassery podcast. I'm Jenn Cassetta, your Chief Badassery Officer. And today, my friends, I have a very special guest for you. Someone that I've known now for 10 years, but I am so blown away by what she's doing in the world, the black belt in badassery that she is. Her name is Brittany Piper, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, but I also want to tell you that this episode is going to be tackling some pretty heavy subjects like trauma, like sexual assault. So just so you're aware, that's what we're diving into, but really about healing. And that's the intention. Thank you all for tuning in. Brittany Piper is an internationally renowned speaker, author, somatic experiencing practitioner, and expert in sexual violence prevention and trauma-informed care. She's also a forensic neurobiology expert, conducting trauma-informed trainings with the U.S. Army and sex crimes detectives. She's the creator of Heal with Britt and founder of the Body First Healing program. Currently, I am reading Brittany's book called Body First Healing, a revolutionary guide to nervous system recovery, where she teaches readers how to break free from survival mode and reclaim their lives using simple yet effective somatic practices. Welcome, Brittany.
I'm so excited to be having a conversation with you. When my book came out, which it's almost a month to the day, which is crazy, I had a lot of podcasts lined up, but to be able to sit in conversation with someone that I personally know and have worked with, not just virtually, but in the flesh.
Yeah. Oh, me too. And thank you for saying yes, because I know you're busy on this podcast and book launch tour. But Brittany and I met about 10 years ago because we were represented by the same speaking agency. And we were flying all around the country doing campus events, mostly for sorority women, but all students on college campuses. And I was always, even back then, I was so impressed by Brittany's work. She's completely vulnerable about her stories for the sake of others. And truly, that's what I consider a black belt in badassery. But now to see how you've grown with your practice, with your healing, with your internal healing, and helping thousands of others heal, I am really blown away. And I just want to start with a quick little paragraph to kick us off. Just again, so listeners, you'll just get a taste, even in these few sentences, of what Brittany's been through. After enduring foster care, the loss of her brother, and surviving sexual assault, she struggled to find healing through conventional therapy. It was only after finding herself in a jail cell that she took her healing into her own hands. Through years of self-discovery and learning that took her all around the globe, she developed the tools that transformed her life, and now she shares them with others. My favorite quote, "You can't talk your way out of trauma, you have to feel your way through it." Brittany. Do you still go by Britt?
My parents call me Brittany, and that's about it these days.
Okay, just checking. But can you bring us back? Can you share with the listeners what brought you to this work?
Yeah. When you read that back, I've lived a lifetime of trauma. But it wasn't really until I was about in high school that I realized that my life had been impacted by trauma. I had the quintessential, I have a roof over my head, I have food on the table, there's no one harming me. But it wasn't until I lost my brother in high school that I understood what trauma really felt like. It was visible. I could see it when I looked in the mirror, the hollowness in my face, the grief that I wore in my shoulders, the weight of trauma. And
how old was your brother at the time? Sorry.
Yeah, he was 18. I was 15. He was a senior. I was a freshman. And we were incredibly close, really close. Growing up, you mentioned, as you read earlier, that I was placed in foster care. So I was placed in foster care When I was born, I was forcibly removed from my mom's care at birth because there was methamphetamine found in our system. I think it's important to give the context because she was a young mom. She was 19 when she had me.
Wow.
My brother had already been born at that point, but she was living on her own out of a car with no support. My biological father had left her while she was pregnant, and she didn't have access to resources, to food. And so she was this very young child trying to raise children and not doing the greatest job of it.
Right.
And yeah, so that's actually where the trauma started for me.
Yeah.
I was reunited with her after a few months. She got her life back on track and her family supported her. But how I came into this work was I had been in and out of therapy starting in high school after my brother's death because I had not just lost my brother, but I had also lost my sense of control, my sense of feeling present in life. And I started resorting to some pretty self-destructive behaviors as a way to cope. And I didn't grow up in an environment where we faced our hardship. We would toss it under the rug and move on. I remember my parents
Like
going back,
many families.
you muscle through, you armor up, you get past it. And I remember my parents going back to work less than 2 weeks after Dominic passed away. It wasn't modeled to me that we take time to process and we take time to feel. And so, because I didn't know how to be in my body and how to be with the grief that was incredibly overwhelming, I resorted to alcohol and drugs and started getting in trouble and being this problem child in high school. And so, my parents put me into therapy and I was diagnosed with different things. First, it was anxiety, then it was ADHD. And when I was 20, I was then sexually assaulted by a stranger who helped me change my flat tire.
And this is a story that you were sharing all over the country on college campuses with students, especially young women, so they can not just prevention, but you were helping people that have already been sexually assaulted heal from sexual assault.
Absolutely. Yeah, because my road to recovery, like many, was not pretty. It's still hard. It's an arduous path that we will walk for the rest of our lives. When it comes to sexual assault, there's the trauma of the experience. And then for many survivors, there's a separate trauma, which is the aftermath, which is how people responded, how people didn't support, how maybe there was victim blaming, how maybe you had to go through this process of seeing your perpetrator again. It's incredibly re-traumatizing,
Yeah.
whichever way you go about it. And so for me, in my experience, I did follow through with pressing charges. It was a pretty grueling process. It took 2 years for us to finally go to trial. And the reason for that is because when a defense team doesn't have a good case, when they know that the person that they represent is going to get convicted, especially in sexual assault or violent crimes cases, they will use the strategy of postponing or continuing a trial over and over again as a way to almost emotionally wear down the victim until they will drop the charges.
Really?
So it's actually very common. So they will just drag it out with the hopes that the survivor or the victim will eventually give up because it's hard. It's a hard process. Every time you have to go to trial, I wouldn't know until usually the day before, the morning before trial, that, oh, it's continued again or it's postponed. And every time, this happened 9 times over that 2-year period, it's like you have to go through a dress rehearsal. So you have to prepare for trial. You have to meet with your legal team, go through your tape statements, talk about exposure therapy, go through your depositions, pretend being on the witness stand. Well, there's also this anticipatory fear of, I'm going to see my perpetrator in the flesh again. And so it was really difficult. And this is where I'm getting to how I came into this work. Now, remember, at the time, I had been on medications. I was still seeing a conventional talk therapist. And behind the scenes, I was still struggling with the alcohol abuse, the pill dependence. I also found myself in a pretty crappy relationship at this point, an abusive relationship. He ultimately was sentenced. We finally went to trial. He was sentenced to 60 years. And I think all along I thought, if he gets convicted and if he gets sentenced, I'll go back to normal and I'll be okay. But when the trial came to an end, I did not get better. And I, in fact, got worse. And it's almost, and I now know looking back, it's like my nervous system was really armored up and dissociated. And then it's like, when it's over, it's like, everything that's been frozen and dissociated in your nervous system is now thawing out and all that or you couldn't feel all of the horror, terror, grief, whatever, it's now emerging. And so I was this ticking time bomb. And I was out one night, this is not even 30 days after the sentencing, with my boyfriend who was drinking and driving. And I always say that's a really good representation of where I was at the time in my life. He was pulled over and arrested. And when the police officers went to physically pull me out of the passenger seat just to give me a ride home, in my impaired state, I went back into a trauma reenactment of a man, of a stranger touching me in a car. And without mind's control, my body went into fight response. And I ended up in a jail cell with 2 counts of battery on an officer. That was back in 2011 at the age of 22.
And can you, just for the listener's sake, I didn't know it's in your book or else I wouldn't ask you to share it again, but just briefly what happened that night in the car?
So there was a moment, it's an important part because I think it's going to help to put the puzzle pieces together of why I went back into that reenactment. But during the assault, this man helped me change my flat tire.
So you're just like pulled over on the side of the road?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Let me take it back. So I was out one night with my friends. I was 20 at the time, college student. We were drinking, dancing, having fun. And we parted ways at the end of the night. And I realized I had left my phone in a friend's purse. So I started driving to her house to retrieve my phone from her. And on the way there, I hit a pothole, ended up with a flat tire, pulled off into the closest gas station that I could find. And there was a man there who helped me change my flat tire. And as a way of saying thank you, I repeatedly offered him money, but he kept insisting I give him a ride home. And so after some time, I reluctantly let him into my car and he started guiding me towards his, I'm using air quotes, house. And what happened after that is that I was brutally raped and beaten. But there was a moment, though, where my initial reaction was to fight back. And I was overpowered. So my nervous system did go into a fight response.
Yep.
And I was overpowered. And when that happened, I then went into freeze, or what we call tonic immobility, which is essentially where the body feigns or plays dead. And we know that 70% of sexual assault survivors will experience a freeze response, which is why they don't fight back, which is why they don't say no, which is why they often don't remember, because there's a lot of things that happen within the body and the brain to protect you in those moments outside of our mind's control.
And here I am teaching self-defense to women. And over the years, I've had to really understand this in a much better way.
Sure.
Because, and I don't even remember if I was guilty or not. I'll just say I was. But I would never be the person that's like, why didn't she fight back? Because I understood the freeze response. But it's very common to hear that from people. Why didn't she fight back? And it's because you couldn't. You were literally frozen. And it's infuriating to hear those types of comments when you really dig into and to learn this stuff.
Yeah.
Again, thank you for sharing this.
Of course. But I do want to speak to the work that you do, because I do think that it's incredibly powerful and it's possible to build new neurological synapses within the brain where when you are proactively doing self-defense work, right, we call these habituating responses, or what we call procedural patterns in the body and the brain, you are creating muscle memory. And the more that we have muscle memory, the more that we are practicing something, think of it this way. It's like in your brain, right? Your nervous system responds instinctually to life. Do I fight? Do I flight? Do I freeze? Do I fawn? But what can happen is that you have this circuit board in the brain, and then you have all these little wires, which are how we're training the brain. And sometimes we just need to build out these new little wires of circuitry to connect these instinctual responses. And so the more that you fire and wire the experience within the muscle, but also within the subconscious brain of self-defense strategies, that starts to build new muscle memory, new procedural patterns. And over time, that can start to become a new instinctual pattern. So I do think it's important, of course, to recognize in the moment when people freeze, there's nothing they can do about that. However, proactively working with self-defense, and I'm already looking at, I should have reached out to you about this. I'm actually looking at, my son is almost 5, my daughter's almost 2, and we're getting him now into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Nice.
And we're going to do the same with Shia as well. But I'm like, no, we are starting them young. We're going to show them how to take up space in their body and how to be with that healthy aggression, because it's so important, especially as women. So yeah, I do just want to speak to that.
Great. And thank you. And also, what I sometimes say in my trainings is, and sometimes you will get overpowered. Like that can happen too, because it would be irresponsible of me to say that everyone can fight back against an attacker. Anyway, please continue.
So I fought back and I was overpowered. And what I know now as a somatic experiencing practitioner, somatic experiencing is a trauma resolution modality where we heal trauma through the body,
right?
More specifically the nervous system. But what I know now is that my body and my nervous system went into a mobilizing stress response. So the stress response cycle is where when there's any perception of threat to our life, and again, perception, right? It might just be a loud bang and it's a muffler outside and all of a sudden your body's like, oh, and you're hiding in the corner because you think you're back in combat, right? Military veterans experience this a lot.
Or September 11th.
Exactly. And so you have these instinctual things that happen. And so again, it's this perception of threat when it's near, which we call a neuroceptive cue of danger. Essentially, your body goes into a stress response cycle. And when this happens, inundated with the mobilizing hormones of adrenaline and cortisol to propel you to fight or flee. And when we can't fight or flee, in this moment, I was overpowered. When that emotional release of adrenaline and cortisol isn't possible, what we call the emotional charge, when we feel angry and frustrated, but I'm going to hold that down because I don't want to ruffle feathers, or I'm going to suppress that disappointment that I have. When we don't set boundaries, what happens is that adrenaline and cortisol remains trapped within the body. And we get stuck in a stress response cycle. It's like your body or your nervous system is storing the stress for later. And over time, that chronic stress starts to guide our life. We get stuck in survival mode. We start to become versions of ourselves that we don't recognize, like this angry version of me. And then it can turn into this allostatic wear and tear on the body, where this chronic stress creates inflammation. It creates tension patterns within the body and the posture and the viscera and the organs. And it creates emotional, physical, somatic symptoms. So a lot of the clients that I work with today in my practice have those symptoms, emotional components of anxiety, depression, the physical components of fibromyalgia, fatigue, chronic pain, digestive issues are huge. And then, of course, the behavioral adaptations. And when we look at the behaviors for me, for instance, of like anytime I would drink, I'd have this rage and I'd get angry and violent with people, again, which was not in my nature. Right. That behavior was my nervous system trying to complete that experience. So in somatic experiencing, we call the work that we do completing the incomplete experience, allowing the nervous system to do now in the present what it couldn't do back then, which is exactly what my nervous system tried to do when those police officers went to pull me out of the car. It's, oh, this is the moment. This is the fight back. Let's do it.
I'm just fascinated that our bodies, our brains are so much more intelligent than we give it credit for, and that we can store all of these hormones, stress hormones, feelings in our body only to come out later on in probably not so positive ways, unless you're doing it in a trained, safe environment with a practitioner.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I think what we're ultimately saying here is that trauma is not over until the nervous system says it's over, which is why a lot of traditional therapy methods of conventional talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, right, where we work with just cognition and thought.
Right.
It's why oftentimes it can fail people, not because it's wrong, but because it's missing a big part of the puzzle.
The body.
The body. Yeah.
Our bodies, they're so powerful.
Yes. And that's not to say that what we're talking about with traditional therapy is top-down modalities that focus on, a lot of people say top-down is modalities that focus on the brain and bottom-up is modalities that focus on the body. But what we're really referencing with the top and the bottom is top-down modalities are focused on the top region of the brain, which is our neocortex, our human brain, which is our cognitive, thinking, talking, rational brain, our conscious brain. And what we focus on in the bottom-up space is the lower two regions of the brain, which is the reptilian brain, the brainstem at the very bottom, which the language there is sensation and impulse. Even just think of a reptile, like a lizard. They're not thinking, they're not emotional creatures. They have impulse and they have sensory information. They're scanning, and then they freeze or they dart and run. Yeah. And so that's the reptilian brain, the brainstem, which is at the base of the neck and the base of the skull and through the neck. And then there is the midbrain, which is the emotional brain, the limbic system. So in this somatic space, which soma means of the body, we focus on that subconscious, subcortical emotion, feeling, sensation, and impulse part of the brain, which is where a lot of trauma, where the memory of trauma is actually stored, not so much in the verbal memory sections of the brain.
So interesting. And listeners, I don't know if you're doing the same as me, but I'm going through my traumatic memories. I'm thinking of my loved ones and the trauma they've been through, how they've processed it. And I've shared so many times the September 11th story. I'm not going to bore you with this, but I had this feeling that diving into my martial arts, like on the mat every day after that for months, years, for 10 years after that experience, I know has helped me overcome PTSD because I don't have any other logical explanation of why I'm fine and didn't have real PTSD symptoms. I did in the first year or so. And even now, like a loud bang, or I have this other weird thing about being in cars and I'm not sure, but reading your book is helping me dive into that. But I just know that because we make noises on the mat, we punch, we kick, we use our bodies in such a powerful way that I feel like I was working it out on the mat.
Absolutely. Yes, you absolutely were. So what you were doing is you were discharging or expelling or releasing the pent up stress hormones, what we call survival hormones of adrenaline and cortisol.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I love about somatic work is that a lot of people, what we have always thought about traditional therapy or the things that help us to come out of PTSD or help us to heal, become more resilient is we have to go back to the places and the experiences of our hurt in order to heal. Just shows that incredible work can be done outside of going back to this treasure chest of pain in the past. And what we often find, or what we have now found in the new research that came out in the early 2000s. So this is where the big shift was. The early 2000s, we had this incredible advancement in medical technology with the neuroimaging abilities that we now have. And we were able to see that recall therapy, which is called exposure-based therapy, where we are recalling events in vivid detail, it actually not just activates the amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain, which then let's think of it as your alarm center. When that goes off, that initiates your stress response. That's like nervous system, go into activation mode. Let's go. It's our survival mode. And so not only does it activate that amygdala, but it also, if you are doing it on a consistent basis, can cause your amygdala to grow in mass, physically grow in mass, which means, again, we are stuck in survival mode. And so going back and rehashing and recalling our memories can actually sometimes do more harm than good. It can keep us stuck in the past. It can keep us stuck in kind of that survival mode. And so that is what I love about somatic healing is that people, by just working with the body and not necessarily having to work with the content and allowing the body to express and expel what's been pent up. Think of it like a pressure cooker. You have this pressure cooker of adrenaline and cortisol that's been building up and building up. And if we don't have the practices or the awareness of how to open that lid a little bit and release a little bit of steam, we're not talking about cathartic work. I don't really promote that, and we can maybe talk about that too. But just lifting
Like
the
punching
steam
pillows and stuff, because I did that once.
So for some people, that can feel overwhelming. And what can happen is, and we've seen this time and time again, is that when people get into somatic work, if they don't do it in a way that is gentle and what we call titrated, which is one gentle little step at a time. We don't want to stress your nervous system more than it already is. We want to stretch it. If people go straight into cathartic work like rage screaming, punching, all of these things, they could walk themselves into traumatic memory, body memory that they're not ready for yet.
Interesting.
And
That is
it
good to
could-
know.
Yeah, and it could further overwhelm the system. So we don't usually in the SE space, we don't do a lot of forced cathartic work.
Okay.
Instead, it's can you imagine what it might be like? Or can you just feel your fists clench right now? And as you're talking about, so let me give you an example. Kind of what we're circling around is a pool. In traditional therapy, your therapist you might think of it this way. They throw you into the deep end, into the trauma, and you might not know how to swim. You might not have floaties. You might not, and you drown in it. In SE, we walk you into the shallow end. We dip your toes into activation. What does it feel like to be with that anger in your body? As you're talking about that moment recently where someone pissed you off because they cut you off or they did something. And as you're talking about that, what do you notice? Well, I'm noticing my heart is beating fast. I'm noticing I'm actually sweating in my armpits. And it's, yeah, can we take a moment to just observe that? And then there's silence and we slow down and we notice, what does the body do next? And I always love asking that question. Can we just be with that and see what happens next? And what you're doing is you're not forcing anything. You're just allowing the body to do, like you said, what it's always known how to do, which is metabolize, move through, and discharge all this stuff. And so that will start to happen with, wow, I'm now noticing I'm clenching my jaw and the heat is rising up to my ears. Yeah. And then there's a breath. And then it's, wow, I'm now noticing there's tears behind my eyes. And even as I'm saying this, I'm feeling a little bit of that. And it's, yeah, your body's letting out a little bit of steam. Can that be here for a moment? And the next thing, there's some gentle crying, or there's an emotion that comes out, or a bit of a, as you said, you growl or grunt, right? In the
Yeah.
yeah. And this can naturally happen. And again, we're just touching into the shallow end. We are working the outer edges of the trauma rather than going into the middle of this trauma vortex. And by dipping our toes in and out and getting used to, this is what anger feels like, and it's safe to be here. What starts to happen is the body starts to become unbound from this stuckness, this, we call it fixity in the nervous system. It starts to release. It starts to allow the body and the nervous system, again, to do now what it couldn't do back then. And we're not circling around the experience. We're working with these more neutral experiences in life. And so by you doing the work that you're doing, right, in the martial arts that you were doing, moving the body is one of the best things that you can actually do to discharge. And again, you're not having to get into the content. Yeah.
Wow. Again, fascinating. And what's coming up for me right now is thinking about, obviously, you work with a lot of women. I do as well. I love and support women. And I'm just thinking how this work would be so helpful for so many men. I'm thinking about my husband a lot during this conversation, and he went to talk therapy when we first met, probably for the first time, and realized that he grew up in pretty much like war times in Northern Ireland. It was the Troubles, and had people blown up by the IRA and a teacher shot in front of him, like really terrible things that he never even realized were trauma for him. Never even realized, never put it together. And he did talk therapy like maybe once or twice, but he felt like he wasn't making progress. Like, okay, I have this trauma, but now what? And again, maybe if he stuck with it or a better therapist or whatever, maybe he could have worked through some of that more. But I just feel like men in general aren't able to, or have been taught that they shouldn't express their emotions in a safe way, and that using their body can be a way that feels good, doesn't go too much outside of their comfort zone, but would have such a dramatic effect and shift. Do you work with a lot of men?
There was a lot of women in my program, but I will say I've noticed in the past few years, and excuse me, when I talk about my program, I'm talking about the Body First Healing program, which I created back in 2017. And over the past few years, I've noticed more men are in the conversation, are in the work, which I think is incredible. But yeah, there's this conditioning of, like, we go back to Tony Porter, who talks about toxic masculinity versus healthy masculinity. What does it mean to be a man? He calls it the man box. Men are taught to be strong, to buck up, to not show emotions. And so it's been interesting for me, I will say, as a mom, raising a boy, teaching him how to be with his emotions in a way that's welcoming, in a way that's accepting. I will say that one of the areas where I feel like men have more success is that they are naturally more moving their bodies, right? I think that does help. When I think about my husband and the seasons of his life that have been difficult, I can also mirror those with times where he was really present in the gym. He was probably checking in more if I checked his membership card. And so, yeah, in ways it does help to allow them to maybe get to a place where their pressure cooker is not overfilling. However, I do think that there's something to be said about being able to reflect on our experiences.
Right.
And when we talk about feeling our feelings, we can just talk about that for a second. There's not always an emotional component to it. A lot of people assume that feelings are synonymous with emotions, and feelings in the SE space, we define as 5 different things, what we refer to as SIBAM. So SIBAM stands for sensation, image, behavior, affect, which means emotion, and meaning. And so for many of us, we have a language of SIBAM that is much stronger. So for instance, let's say that anytime a feeling comes up and you go straight into meaning, so many of us are here, right? We're like making sense of our feelings rather than just feeling our feelings. For some of us, we're really strong in the sensation channel. I have clients who go straight into, I'm noticing there's this expansion in my chest right now, or there's a lot of constriction around my throat, or I'm feeling really hot, or my stomach just dropped. Some people are really in tune with their body. Image is more, can we imagine something as we're feeling this? So I mentioned earlier, it felt like when I was talking about the grief, like it felt like a weight on my shoulders. And so maybe it's imagining these bricks that are here. And the B of SIBAM, behavior, is more so what's the body doing? So in SE, a lot of the methodology behind SE, which was developed by Dr. Peter Levine, who's the creator of SE, his work started with actually studying animals in the wild.
This I find so fascinating from your book.
Yeah. And the reason that, and I don't know if I know it's in the book, but I always get it wrong. It's either ethology or ethnology, which is the study of animals in the wild. But he started to study animals in the wild because animals in the wild, or animals, have identical nervous systems to human animals. The only thing that they don't have is they don't have this wonderful human conscious cognitive brain that's always talking or thinking our way or judging our feelings. They allow the body to feel and express. And when we are in an SE session, SE therapists are often studying the small micro movements or behaviors of the body. Oh, I'm noticing they're looking to the left a lot, or I'm noticing that there's a tilt in the head. I'm noticing the shoulder diaphragms just inflated, or I'm noticing that there's some clenching in the jaw. We can even notice like, oh, there's a moment where, oh, they're touching their tongue to the roof of their mouth right now, even though their mouth is closed. So there's little things that we notice. And these little micro movements or behaviors usually mean something. The body is always telling us a story, and those stories are usually a part of our history. And the way that our nervous system or our body has, again, muscle memory, has learned to adapt and survive. So we might notice that as we're feeling a feeling, I don't know what the emotion is. I don't know how to make sense of it. I can hardly feel the sensations in my body, but I'm noticing that I'm really fidgety with my hands, or I'm noticing that my posture is really closed up. I'm noticing that I'm sitting on the edge of my seat, or that I just collapse back. That's telling us something about our feelings. And then the last one is A of SIBAM, which is affect or emotion. Some people are really good at naming emotions. Again, I think that when it comes to feeling our feelings, it doesn't always have to be this emotional component. Sometimes it's just, hey, I'm noticing in your body language something right now. What do you think about that? And it's, okay. Or I'm noticing you're closing in. How are you feeling right now? Or what's going on? So those are also ways that we can, because I think about my husband, he doesn't like to talk about his emotions.
Can you go back to Levine's research on animals' trauma response and just share how wild animals express their trauma? What he noticed essentially, and again, I'm paraphrasing, but it was like, okay, animals go through trauma all the time, and yet they're fine afterwards. So why is that? And why do human animals have trauma if not expressed, and we're traumatized our whole lives, some of us?
Yes. Yeah. Here's question, his big question, which he explores in the book, Waking the Tiger. He has multiple books, but his first big book was Waking the Tiger. And in the book, he asked the question, animals in the wild are routinely faced with threat, right? That threat response, the stress response cycle. Yet they don't remain traumatized in the threat. They don't remain stuck. They don't get the same symptoms that human animals do. Why is that? And the answer is because they allow their bodies to go through the stress response cycle without disrupting, overriding, halting that stress response cycle.
Or judging. Yeah, judging.
Judging. Yeah. And how that works is there are a lot of different ways that they discharge the adrenaline and cortisol, the stress hormones. They do that through shaking. They do that through emoting. They do that through labored breathing, trembling,
Growling, hissing.
growling. Yep, yep. And so if you were to just look up, though, like just Google, for all of you who want to do this, just Google animals wild discharge, and it'll be like a National Geographic day. Like you're going to see tons of videos of animals in the wild doing these things.
Love it.
And I will say it's so backwards from what we have learned or what we've been told. So I just think about my stage fright. I don't know if you suffered from stage fright. I did for the longest time. And I remember, I share this story all the time. Actually, I think I might have written this in the book. I remember when I first joined the speakers agency that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Back in the day, when you joined this agency, you had to do a bit of a showcase in front of the whole agency.
Worst, because you're in front of your peers.
In front of your peers.
Yeah, that's scarier than getting on stage in front of strangers to me.
Talk about a pressure cooker. And I completely froze when I gave my new speaker presentation. And I remember we were in like this corporate conference room. Everyone's sitting at the boardroom table. I'm like, this is not a stage. This feels so dry and weird. I completely froze. Then I fell apart. I was a big ball of tears. I remember turning around in the corner and I just said, I need a moment. I faced the corner of the room and I just cried for probably 30 seconds, which felt like 10 minutes. And later on, I was like, I'm going to get fired. They're going to drop me. That was horrible. And I remembered my boss, I'm using air quotes boss.
Yeah.
So it feels like family to me, dear friend, but he took me out to dinner that night. And I was like, oh, they're letting me go. And he told me, I didn't hire you to be a speaker. I hired you to share your story. The speaking part can come with time. So I remember I committed to joining Toastmasters clubs, which is where you practice professional speaking.
Right.
Like you have drop-in meetings that you can do all over the world to work on this. And what I was taught is that you need to be able to calm down. You need to be able to just do some breathing exercises. It's the opposite. Instead, it's what can I do to actually, again, lift the lid of this pressure cooker rather than clamp it down and force myself to be calm, which is so impossible to do. And that's why I would get up and I would have voice fatigue for the first 5 minutes. I couldn't talk. I couldn't catch my breath. I would start seeing tunnel vision. And it wasn't until, and I remember you were actually a part of this. You didn't realize. I remember, I don't know if it's a workshop you did. I just remember seeing you talk about the power pose, the Superman pose, and how you would do that before programs. And I'm like, that's a great idea. So I started
still do
that. And we now know, and I'm sure you talk about the research behind this, the postural attitude, that when you come into a posture, when you put your body intentionally into a certain posture and you engage the muscles to activate that posture, you allow your nervous system to go into that stress response cycle. And so it allowed me to take up space. And what would happen is I would start to feel this heat in my body. I'd feel this buzzing rather than trying to clamp it down. And so that's what started it for me, is what can I do to not actually calm down, but to rise up a little bit and to allow this to come out. So now, if you ever see me at an event, I'm usually off stage and I am doing a little bit of heel drops and shaking in my hands.
I love that. I love bounce. So I bounce as well.
And that's a great way to just increase your heart rate, increase your circulation. It promotes more of that stress response to get it out. Yep. I also do vocalizing. So I usually will grunt and growl. So I'll go, do that. And it just warms up your voice box. It allows the larynx and pharynx again to take up space. And then when I've discharged, then what I do is I actually like to come out in the audience and I'll walk around and I'll just talk with a couple of people.
Yeah.
And what that does is it helps my nervous system to just find some familiarity with the crowd, to co-regulate, which activates that social engagement system, which feels really regulating. That way, when I'm getting up on the stage, I'm not just seeing these faces for the first time and it feels more comfortable.
When I connect with the audience beforehand, I'm thinking, I already know you. I'm not going to be nervous in front of you because I already know you. I made a connection. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And there's so many takeaways here.
We could talk for hours, I'm sure.
We could talk for hours, but there's just a couple more things I wanted to touch on. Basically, I want to just bring the story back to you. There was a line in your storytelling in the book where you're just like, at first you said in this interview, you were diagnosed with all these other things, ADHD, depression, I believe, anxiety. You were taking the pills prescribed for all these things. And then at some moment, you said you threw away the pills. Did you throw away the diagnoses as well? Is that a word? Diagnoses?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yes.
and can you just bring that full circle for us?
Absolutely, I can. Two things. So, yeah, I think this kind of brings full circle what happened when I was in the jail cell, which I didn't talk about. So, take you back to that. Again, this was 30 days after the trial ended. I was arrested because I went into this fight response with these police officers. And I remember calling my parents from jail, telling them what happened, and tough love. They're like, you're going to stay there for a little bit. I remember my dad saying, if you don't learn how to live with your pain, you're literally going to kill yourself. I was going down a pretty bad path, but it was in that jail cell. It was like this 6x8 jail cell. I went through processing, and I actually went to jail. I was transferred to a jail in a jumpsuit. I was there for 2.5 days. But it was in this cell that I wasn't able to reach for the alcohol, the substances, the things that helped me to escape, distract, or numb from all that I had been running from. It was me, my pain, all of the decades old grief and emotions that again had been piled up that I was not yet ready to face. And I learned here that avoiding is not the same thing as processing. And so in that jail cell, my body started to experience intense releases of this pent up activation. I have never seen what a drug withdrawal looks like in person, but I would assume it probably looked like that. There was intense sweating, trembling, shaking, tears that felt like they had been held in for so long.
Mm.
And I remember leaving that experience feeling different in my body. I felt like there was this internal, and Peter refers to it, Peter Levine, as trauma is a devastating moment when this internal straitjacket gets frozen in time, which is the nervous system. We get stuck in this moment in the past. We get stuck in our armor and our survival responses. And I felt like my body became incredibly free. And so I went and I talked to my therapist. Again, I was seeing a conventional therapist. I had told her what had happened. And I said, I'm feeling different in my body. This was like a week later. And I also told her, I was like, and I feel like I have a lot more clarity. Like things feel really crystal clear in my life. And I know what I need to do to start. Like, I just felt very clear that this is not the direction I want anymore. And so she recommended that I start seeing a somatic therapist who at the time was trained in polyvagal theory, which I'm also trained in, which is the newest upgraded science of the nervous system. And so that started my process of learning how to not just be able to be with discomfort, but to be in my body in moments where it also felt safe to be in my body. I noticed pretty quickly after about 6 months of doing the work that things rapidly started to change. My relationships started to change. I felt different in my body. A lot of the panic and the anxiety that I had started to dissipate. Physically, I felt again lighter and more lifted. And so there came a time within that first year where, yeah, all of the medications were gone. And I think I realized in that moment that for me, I think that I was misdiagnosed. And I'm not saying that's the case for everyone. I talk about this in the book. I like to think of it as, and there's the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk.
Which I can't get through, and which is why I'm so excited to get through your book because it's such an easy read.
In his book, he says that trauma doesn't come back necessarily as a memory, but it comes back as a reaction. And this is the nervous system, again, using the same defensive or protective strategies that it used back then in the here and now. So we get stuck in the trauma, we get stuck in the reactions. And so I conceptualize in my mind that when we look at a lot of the disorders today that are in the DSM, when I work with clients, I find that these diagnoses, whether it's anxiety, whether it's ADD, whether it's OCD, whether it's depression, a lot of these disorders are actually reactions, manifestations of how the body and the brain have lovingly and brilliantly given us tools to survive. So instead of post-traumatic stress disorder, it was a post-traumatic stress reaction. It was an anxiety reaction. I had to become hypervigilant because I was stuck in threat. Instead of ADHD, it became a reaction. Instead of overcompulsive disorder, it's overcompulsive reaction. We need control. We need order in our life because maybe we didn't have that growing up. And I see that time and time again that a lot of the clients that come in with a lot of those disorders, it often ties back to trauma and how the body, again, found ways to adapt. And then we get stuck there. And so that's why I love somatic work, because it gets down to the root of our experiences rather than just symptom management or disorders or diagnoses, which I do talk about in the book. Diagnoses are more profitable, more
Right.
billable.
I have so many other questions, but I think we're going to allow this to sink in because I think if you're out there listening, tell me if you agree, but I just feel like this is a conversation I can come back to again and again to listen to. And over time, I'll be driving in the car and thinking about it, or in the shower, and like when you're relaxed, and start to connect some of the dots for not just myself, but people in my life as well. So this was incredibly eye-opening and helpful. I know it's going to help so many people, Brittany. Thank you, Britt.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So really quickly, I have 4 rapid fire questions that seemed silly after all that like deep work that we just did.
I love these. I love
Good.
these.
Number 1, what was your favorite food when you were a kid?
Macaroni and cheese with hot dogs mixed in. Again, I was a child raised by children, so
got it. Yes. If you could have a drink, doesn't have to be alcoholic, with anyone, alive or dead, what would it be? What's in your drink?
Kombucha. I've loved kombucha for years. I don't really drink alcohol, and especially now it's a nice little treat that Noah, my 4-year-old, and I get to have. Every night we split a kombucha.
I love it. But with who? Alive or dead?
Oh, probably the same. Probably with my family. They're just my favorite people. Yeah. So even, with my kids, it's the cutest thing.
Awesome. Okay. What is your favorite self-help book?
Mine? No, I'm just kidding.
Besides yours.
Man, there's so many. Actually, a book that I really love is by Mark Wolin, and it's called It Didn't Start With You.
Okay.
And it is a book all about epigenetics and intergenerational trauma and how trauma gets passed down from generation to generation, and how that shapes our nervous system and our behaviors and our hormones and everything about us. And that has been, I focused a lot on my healing and my traumas. And I feel like now the deeper work that I'm getting into is the trauma of the generations of women that came before me, how much work, especially now having a daughter, that's what I'm into these days. Yeah, It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin. Incredible book.
Adding it to the list. And last but not least, what's your favorite hype song?
Yeah, the hype song. Oh man, I love soundtrack music. Like, I like Hans Zimmer. I almost traveled to Europe last year to see him in concert, or a couple years ago, and then I found out that he was going to be here in Dallas, so that was my birthday gift. I'm not big into hype songs. I'm into like cinematic, very dramatic music. Inception soundtrack, great. Interstellar, amazing. That's
random. I love it. Again, thank you so much. Tell everyone where we can connect with you and how we can find out more about your programming, but also everyone, run and get this book, Body First Healing by Brittany Piper.
Yeah, so you can find me on social media, on Instagram or on TikTok at Heal with Britt with 2 T's. I share a lot of educational content, a lot of inspirational content, and just a lot about my life. For me personally, I like to be able to connect with people. And then if you want to learn more about the book, the program, the work that I do, my speaking, you can just go to
bodyfirsthealing.com. Thank you so much again. Everyone, thank you for listening to this important conversation. And my biggest ask for you today is to share this episode with someone in your life who could really, really use it. And I'm sure there's so many of us out there. So again, be well. I'll see you next time on the Art of Badassery podcast.